Hi there, it's Kevin with Rogue Market here with another tips and trick video. This one is going to be focused on one of my favorite sites, which is called EDHREC. EDHREC is the one-stop place for all Commander data that you need. This is just an absolute goldmine when you are trying to find potential specs. Now, Commander/EDH works a little bit differently than competitive, that the casual crowd has a lot more to influence cards than the competitive crowd. Now, a lot of competitive EDH players do not understand that. They're like, okay, this card is strictly better. Doesn't really matter in the scope of EDH. And in fact, EDH has what I like to call a little bit of an inbred effect, meaning that people see a card because someone else posted a deck list or someone else played it at their store and they replicate it, whether or not it's like a good card, because there is no tournament results really for casual or just regular Commander. And so that is good to keep in mind, and that is why EDHREC is very, very important, because there's cards on here that I personally would never play because I don't think the power level is there, but other people do see decks, and I've had customers completely come into my store, use my computer, print out an EDH deck that they found on Tapped Out or something like that, or right here on EDH, and carbon copy it. And so yes, Commander has its own little net decking issue, but it's not really with competitive results. It really is just with many decks that end up playing a particular card get put into EDH as being played of very, very highly, and then, of course, rinse and repeat, those cards go up in value. So this is one metric that I think that you should be very, very focused on. This is if you come over to EDHREC and go over to sort by sets. I've just got all the sets out here, and you can see that Wizards of the Coast must be following this sort of data very closely as well, because all of these cards tend to get reprinted very, very quickly. If you actually scroll back to way old Magic, let's go back to all the way back to, let's say, Saviors of Kamigawa. There is not one card here on the top cards played that has not had a reprint. So again, you can just look through here for the top cards until we get to Journey into Nyx. And this is quite interesting because this, if you would have been looking at this, say, a year ago, Mana Confluence would have been a huge duh in a card to invest in if you didn't think it was going to get it reprinted in the next Commander block. Mana Confluence is all the way up to Card Kingdom's buy list of $8. They're selling it for $15. And you have the TCG market price here. I believe that's actually the TC mid that EDHREC use, of all the way up to $8.73. And so this is why I love EDHREC so much. It just is right here of cards that see a lot of play. They're pricing here, and you can just do a lot of exploration. This will click right on TCG if you click on it, or Card Kingdom, and you can look at the supply on both of those outlets. Those are typically the two vendors that I look most closely at because I think they influence the market more than anyone. And then, of course, you can go to other vendors after that and look for any vendors that might be lagging behind with these prices. So very interesting here. You should do this with the sets that are recent or not so old and see which ones have not been reprinted. For example, look at Ugin the Spirit Dragon and Sidisi Undead Vizier. Both of these, of course, have these high price tags because they have not been reprinted for Commander since their original set releases. So it also gives you some interesting data on like exactly what a reprint does to the overall cost of a card. And like a lot of these get reprinted a ton because of just how much they see play. It's also a good little resource for cards that get reprinted in standard sets to know exactly how they'll rebound going forward. So scrolling through this data, there's some obvious picks though of what are going to go up because they have low supply due to not being reprinted. So of course the Mana Confluence, the Sidisi Undead Vizier, and one of my favorites, the Gyreet Sanitarium. I think this card is just an absolute duh to pick up because if you actually do click on the Gyreet Sanitarium, it will show you just how many decks this is in. This is 10,000 decks, and it seems like Thalia is closely behind, so both of these are really good for potential specs. If you actually look over Imprisoned by the Moon, Imprisoned by the Moon is actually a little more expensive than Gyreet Sanitarium, which doesn't make any sense to me. This card is just lagging behind due to how much actually supply or how much demand this actually sees in Commander, and this is definitely one of the cards that is going to go up in value quicker than the rest of these cards. If you go to sets that are about the same time period. So if we come over here to Conspiracy, for example, we can kind of compare how Gyro Reach Sanitarium stacks up versus other decks. So look at this. So Conspiracy came out not too long after it, and Recruit of the Guard, of course, is a legacy, but it sees play in many, many decks. But like, look at Expropriate and whatnot. This is only 6,000 decks. So the Gyro Reach Sanitarium is seeing double the amount of play. If we actually go over to the first rare, look at it like Grenzo, Havoc Razor. Yes, all apples aren't all, I'm comparing apples to oranges because of the supply of Conspiracy, of course, way lower than the supply of Eldritch Moon. So let's go over here and look at just like a Shadows of Innistrad set. If we come over here and look at anything else with Cryptoth Rite or Westville Abbey is probably very comparative in comparison to the Gyro Reach Sanitarium. And so it's always about comparing data to data. And sometimes markets don't work in a logical way. In fact, one of my favorite psychologists, his name is Daniel Kahneman, he studied this. In fact, he was able to create some theories and some philosophies that then were created into some people made some software. They developed some software to analyze the overall mood of the market, and they determined that people's moods and people's illogical behaviors had more to do with the movement of the stock market than actual sheer data. But eventually, sheer data does catch up to where a price point should be, and this is true for Magic the Gathering. And this is one of the very, very key aspects of MTG Finance, is to get ahead of the data. So in my opinion, Gyro Reach Sanitarium is going to be something that's going to have a price correction. Now, there are some other factors. If Gyro Reach Sanitarium, for example, was printed in a pre-constructed deck, or any sort of supplemental product, or had any promos, but to my knowledge, this card absolutely does not have any of those printings. So this is something that I was able to use EDHREC and easily identify as a card that's going to go up in value. So let's just take some other sets that are more recent. These are the type of sets that I like investing in right now, and there's another one that is just a knockout of the park investment. This is Disallow. Look at the price point of Disallow. Disallow sees play in 1,300 and 13,000 decks is how much Disallow sees play in EDH. This, I believe, doesn't have any supplemental. It wasn't in the Challenger decks, I don't believe. So I think that Disallow is one of those typical cards that saw a lot of play in Standard, and then when it got rotated, all of that Standard supply dumped back into the market. And so all these other EDH cards like Heroic Intervention and Rishkar's Expertise never got redumped into the marketplace, even though that Disallow sees more play into EDH. So these ones, the EDH has been stripping the supply and is able to accrue more of a natural gain than Disallow that went up to $5-6 when it was in Standard and then crashed once the supply got back in. So if you actually look at Disallow, compare it directly with Heroic Intervention, this is probably the price point of where Disallow should be for the demand from EDH. This is a quite substantial amount of decks as this is played in. It's a whole whopping 3,000 or 30% more than Heroic Intervention. So the price point, of course, should start to follow suit and go up. So again, this is another way that you're able to find these kind of anomalies in the market, the market supply, and then invest in cards before they inevitably go up. You can actually, this is what I use even more than just the top card, just in comparison. You can find some other like undervalued, very, very undervalued cards comparatively to how much they see play. I'm looking at Planar Bridge. A lot of times I like to see mythics here. So Planar Bridge already up to the about $4 mark. It sees about half amount as Paradox Engine. So you got to think that it should have about maybe half or whatnot value. This is another card that most likely will start to go up in value as it's the second most played mythic out of Aether Revolt. So just an absolute gold mine. So what I've been doing in the past couple weeks is I've been looking at Nullstone Gargoyle Spike and trying to find any sort of cards that are going to be like an old card that hasn't been reprinted that sees a substantial amount of play in EDH. So we can come over here to even something like, we'll just pick on Lorwyn here, and then see the first card that hasn't been reprinted. And again, in my opinion, that is always a pretty decent spec if it has any sort of significant amount of commander play. So you can see though, they really, really, really do target these, but we do find a goodie here. Look at Rings of Brighthearth. I don't think that this is something that you should invest in at the moment, but here's to prove my point. Rings of Brighthearth is the first card that has not been reprinted from Lorwyn and has a substantial amount of play in Commander, and boom, look at that price tag of Rings of Brighthearth. It is up to $47 on Card Kingdom, $48 on Card Kingdom, and a TCG mid of about $36.50. That is huge. That is just showing you the value of not even making even the top 10 of an old card if it sees play in Commander. So if we scroll down, the other next card that has not seen a reprint would be this Elvish Harbinger, which might be poised to go up in value. Uncommon's kind of awkward though, but this could be the card. It's yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weak though. At this point though, when you're getting down to the 3000s, it's not that great. Look at Lignify. Lignify could be a target, but Lorwyn might just be one of them that all the value has been reprinted. First Fruition though, look at this one. It only sees play in 2,788. Has a $10 price tag because it has not been reprinted. So a lot of times that's how you can find the Nullstone Gargoyles, or of course if another card comes out that actually utilizes it, that eventually you can do this price comparison and know a card will go up. Let's just look at another one here. Let's see if we can find a good one. Let's look at Shards of Alara. See if Shards of Alara has one that just stands out. So far all of them have been reprinted. And the first card that we see would be Ad Nauseam. Ad Nauseam is the first card that has not been reprinted that sees a significant amount of play. And of course it does see Modern play, so we're not going to look at that one for the sake of the argument of Modern. But man, yeah, this is also another way to know that these cards are going to be reprinted. So here we go with the Knight Captain of Eos. This one actually does seem quite interesting because if we compared it to other cards that had about 3,000 decks from other sets, those got up to what, $10? So whenever, say for example, if a soldier commander comes out that wants to utilize Knight Captain of Eos, this card will go crazy. And so what are the odds that a commander that comes out that utilizes soldiers in the next couple of years before this card is able to see a reprint is going to happen? And in my opinion, that's pretty decent. Another one is Vicious Shadows. Whenever a creature is put in a graveyard from play, you may have Vicious Shadows deal damage to target player equal to that number of cards in that player's hand. This card is in various combo base. Judith actually makes me think of Vicious Shadows could be a kind of a spec target for Judith. Let's actually pull up Vicious Shadows, see if it's seeing play in Judith, and it looks like it's still Prosh, so it doesn't look like Judith decks have really hit it. I guess we'd have to go over here and look at Judith. That'd be a better way. And see if Judith is actually using Vicious Shadow, and if it is, then let's go over to enchantments here, and if it is, then that makes me think that this card actually could go up in value. But it doesn't look like Judith decks are really incorporating it, probably because the mana cost is pretty high, and there are a lot of other cards that do a similar effect as that. So again, that is basically my go-to way of picking up cards. I really like to use this for rotation when a set is just recently rotated, or sets that I think are right on the verge of being able to go up in value. I think that the more, what I like to call like Magic 3.0, where cards started being printed at a very, very high rate, and that started Return to Ravnica. I think some of the older ones of that time period are about ready to start accruing a lot of value. We can go over to like these, so Dragon's Maze, for example, and pick up a card that out of Dragon's Maze that hasn't had a reprint that sees a substantial amount of play. If we actually look right here, Dead of the Debt List. Dead of the Debt List is actually in 7,000 decks. It hasn't seen a reprint. I don't know if it was in any sort of box or supplemental product. Render Silence, another one. That's pretty significant of 9,000 decks. So this could easily be a spec of Render Silent. We can actually look at the price history here of the Render Silent and see what it's actually doing. It doesn't have the price trend here, but it does seem to have quite a bit of supply here. A lot of people still have tons of supply for Render Silent. Who knows if Absorb's going to take that slot too, but it is another card that can just be played in any sort of Azorius deck. And again, there's another in Plasm Capture. That's quite interesting, of 6,000 decks of still a bulk rare price. Who knows when Dragon's Maze is actually going to be able to strip the supply of these rares. It's getting close in my opinion because we're seeing other cards. But typically for this though, you do want to pick something that is pre-Return to Ravnica to know if there is some sort of anomaly of a card that could go up in value. Let's just look at Scars of Mirrodin here. That seems like a good set. Scars of Mirrodin, look at Exsanguate. It hasn't seen a reprint, $4 uncommon. Asceticism, a $12 uncommon. And in fact, this could be poised to go up again because look at the Card Kingdom price Let's go check out their buy list, for example. So we have a market price of 12, or if it uses TCG, and if we go to, oh, they've bumped it down. So it looks like they must have got someone to buy, sell a ton of copies to them. So this is no longer accurate here of the $18. Nope, that is the price they're selling it as. Maybe they're worried about a reprint. But if we go down here, the next card that has not seen a reprint is Nim's Death Metal. That was something that has recently spiked up. We also have Contagion Engine. And then we have Kadatha Forge Master. This has been a card that I've been soft specking in for a long time just because of how good this card does. I was very surprised that Brea didn't make this card go through the roof. Painful Quandary is another one that this is a card I typically don't play in most of my decks, but that deal with discard because there's just too many better options. But Painful Quandary is another one that sees a significant amount of play and has relatively low supply, being of Scars of Mirrodin. So anyway, that's just some food for thought. This is something you should definitely use. This is just one of the aspects of the EDH that I like to look at is by set. You can also go over here by cards by color. You can also go over here by top commanders, and all of these are definitely something you should be doing on your daily basis or weekly basis of checking out the EDH kind of trends here. So it looks like Teysa is still the most played this week, followed by Atraxa, which is the most played over all time. And we actually have Joda that's trending up. So again, you could come over here and be like, okay, Joda's trending up. It might be finally to the point where it's made 1,000 decks. That's quite significant. What cards are seeing play in Joda? And come over here, find one with a relatively low supply, and that makes a good spec here. So look at the Moyen of the seeing wins is all the way up to $7 on Card Kingdom and $10 on the TCG. We look at Brilliant Ultimatum. There we go. There's a card with low stock that was Shards of Alara that is as a relatively low price tag, and that could be something that could be invested in if you think that Joda is going to continue the trend and seeing what, like, I mean, you can do just a little math here. So it's getting about 50 decks per week, and it is the Brilliant Ultimatum is in 25% of the decks, so 30% of the decks. So about 30% of 50, what we're looking like, 15 decks, a little more than that, are 15 of these Brilliants are being posted on EDHREC per week, and you can do kind of a little bit of a trajectory there of where the supply will be in a few weeks. So again, these are always good to get ahead of reprints, as if it hasn't been reprinted, you know that it's coming. It looks like Wizards is quite lazy when they design their commander. It's funny, out of the casual formats, the one that seems to be more concerned about getting reprints into their box sets than it is with the more competitive, like Legacy or Modern. You'd think it'd be kind of the opposite. But yeah, very, very good resource. This should be stickied, bookmarked, and we'll look at some other tips and tricks with EDHREC in the future. But this is just an absolute goldmine. If you're looking to get ahead of data, this is the one-stop shop for Commander. It's been Kevin with the Rogue Market. Thanks for watching.